As you can see, I've got the scooter up on the workbench, got it all strapped down, and that is because I'm hoping I can get it fired up now, and I'd like to map out the ignition timing as it's set up by the recommendations from MVT. So I've got their CDI on here. I've got the ignition set up to 0.35 millimeters before top dead center because I've got a longer stroke. That's by their spec. And I'd like to use my timing light here and try to figure out what the timing comes out to when it's set up to that spec. Normally, if I'm trying to map out ignition timing on other projects, what I've done is I'll just aim my timing light at whatever indications I have, whatever markings I have, and then I'll make notes of it, just trying to hold the RPM as steady as I can. In this case, I happen to have a shifter bracket from some shifter that I had in one of my cars left over sitting here, and luckily for me, it lines up in a way that I could bolt it on and mount my little tuning tack here, this Trailtech TTO tack. I mounted it right next to my timing indicator setup, so I'm hoping that I'll be able to get the camera on there and get a real accurate view straight on at the timing marks here, and also see the RPM I'm at to give us a better idea of exactly what's happening with a little better accuracy. But first things first, before I can do any of that, I've got to see if I can just get it to start. Since I have the CVT kind of disassembled here, I'm just going to use an electric drill in reverse and try to fire the engine up that way. So far I have no signs of life, so that's not good. I just looked at my tuning tack there mounted on the other side, as well as the tack that's mounted on the scooter as far as my Trailtech Vapor, and both of them are showing that I've revved it up to about 3,000 RPMs while doing this. So it's getting a signal here to the wire. I haven't checked the spark yet, but before I go and pop anything off and try to check for spark, I'm just going to give it a few more tries and see if maybe it fires up. It has been sitting for quite a while for this project, so it could just be that maybe something flooded, or it could be lean right now and needs to be choked. But give it a few more tries. Okay, well, it starts. Now then we'll start. Let me put the choke back on. Okay, well, I can tell you immediately that sounds like a different engine than it did before, although I don't have the CVT hooked up, so it's not driving the transmission right now, but still, that's a totally different sound than I had before revving it up. It seems that it was just way over revving when I had the choke on, and once the choke was off, it seems alright. But anyway, I gotta open up the garage door so I don't smoke myself out of here, and then I can get on to see if I can test this ignition timing out. Just wanted to show you real quick. There's my max RPM at 19,999 maxed out, so I'm pretty sure it's got to be reading double the RPM. So I'm going to go through and change the settings on this, as well as my other tack, to 2 pulses per revolution, and that should straighten it out, I think. Setting both of my tacks at 2 pulses per revolution seems to have done the trick. The RPM looks accurate to me. For this small tuning tack that I've got mounted down here by the rotor, I actually had to take it and cut the end of the wire and connect it directly to my coil positive wire because I couldn't get a reliable signal just wrapping it around the spark plug wire. So I got that straightened out, but now my timing light is giving me a problem. Looks like that's going to be a holdup because I have tried every which way that you can put this clamp on the spark plug wire. I've tried putting it around the coil positive wire to see if that would give me anything. I cut the protective covering on my spark plug wire off just in case that was interfering with something, and I can't get anything out of it. And all the messing around that I've done with it, I haven't seen a single flash of my timing light here. And normally, even when this doesn't work, I'll be able to get it to flash here and there, but I can't even get a single flash out of it. So either my timing light has an issue, or for whatever reason it doesn't want to pick up the signal from the stator here, this ignition setup. But I'm guessing what I'm going to end up doing is probably ordering another timing light. This one has been around quite a while. I have dropped this clamp probably on numerous occasions over the years. So there's a possibility that maybe I broke something inside of there at one point. And it has been kind of iffy, hit or miss with a lot of ignition systems for me in recent years. So I'm probably going to start by just ordering another timing light, and I'm hoping that will work. I've ordered a timing light, actually two of them. One is a new model, and the other is an old model from the 60s, a Craftsman, because I'm hoping the new one works. It's got all the bells and whistles, but if not, maybe the old 1960s model that's not an inductive style like everything else is today. Maybe that'll pick up a signal if nothing else works. I don't know. Hopefully the first one will work, the new model, but we'll see. Anyway, for right now, I'm kind of sitting on my hands just waiting on that to arrive, and I thought I could do some testing that may be useful for me or someone else for troubleshooting in the future with this MVT ignition. So a lot of times if I don't have spark, I like to check the signal coming from my stator, and that would be this red and black wire on the MVT. And if I have problems with charging or lighting, then I like to check the signal from the stator as well. That would be the yellow and white wires from the MVT ignition. So I've got my digital multimeter out, and I thought I would just check those because I don't really see any specs published on that. And if you go to try and figure out what's wrong with your scooter and you have no idea where it should be, it doesn't do you a whole lot of good to test. You're just guessing at that point. So I thought, hopefully while everything's fresh out of the box and working properly, I'll go ahead and get some numbers off of those to share with you guys and for my own use for reference in the future. I'm going to start with a red and black wire coming out of the stator, and that is the one that powers the CDI and allows you to have spark. And this is a real simple process for all of them. It's pretty much the same deal for every wire that I test here. So I've got my multimeter. My black probe is down there attached to a ground. I've actually got it on the negative battery terminal. You can use a engine ground, frame ground. And then for the red probe, positive probe, you're just going to make contact. My terminal is going to be a little different than yours, but you're just going to make contact with the terminal coming from the engine. And this should be unhooked from your scooter. I don't like to test this stuff with it all hooked up. Just unhook it from your scooter, and however you need to, get your probe in there so that it makes good contact with the metal of the terminal, the connector. You may notice back here I've got my probe electrical taped into my connector. That way I don't have to worry about it coming free when I'm working on other stuff over here. You'll need your multimeter set to volts. In this case, I'm going to go ahead and set mine to max, so it'll show me what the max volts are when I'm doing this. If you don't have a max voltage setting on your multimeter, no big deal. Just watch what's happening on the screen and try to catch whatever the highest number is that you see. And you're going to crank the engine over in order to watch this and see what kind of voltage comes out. You can use a kick start, electric start. In my case, I'm going to have to use a drill because I don't have my CVT installed right now. But crank the engine over and see what kind of voltage you get out of there. Okay, so I got 66.5 volts, which is actually pretty similar to what I'm used to with a standard scooter ignition system. Usually you want to see somewhere around 50 volts as a minimum if you're kicking it over. I may get a little more because I'm cranking the engine over faster with this drill than I probably would by kicking. I'm going ahead and resetting this, and I'm going to try it one more time. I'm going to try and go real slow with the drill, which is kind of hard to do. It doesn't like to go super slow, but just to give me a better idea of what it is, maybe at a slower cranking speed. Yeah, so trying to turn it over pretty slow, I still get 50 volts. So most likely if I'm trying to troubleshoot this in the future, I know that I want to see somewhere around 50 volts at least if I expect this to be a working system. And now I'm going to do basically the same thing in order to test my yellow and white wires. So I can just leave my ground hooked up to my battery, and then I will reposition my positive probe here into one of the wires. I'll go ahead and start with the yellow wire. I've got my meter reset. I'm going to go ahead and put it on max again. Same process, just going to crank the engine over, see what kind of voltage I get out of there. So near 5 volts going slow, and that does appear to be attached properly. Go a little faster and see if it picks up. Not a whole lot. So probably somewhere around 5 volts it looks like is what I should expect out of that yellow wire coming out of the stator. Now I'm just going to switch this over to the white wire instead. And that looks like about the same thing. Looks like with a slower crank, probably around 5 volts. And a little higher cranking speed like using the drill, I'm getting roughly 6 volts out of there. I also want to do a running check with my charging and lighting wires, because usually if you just have a lighting or charging issue, you're still able to start the scooter. So everything is hooked up the same way. I did reconnect my red and black wire to the stator into the harness, but I've just got my positive probe into the white wire at this moment, and then the negative probe into the ground terminal on my battery. Set my multimeter here for max voltage, and this time I'm going to start the scooter up and see what kind of voltage we get with it running. Alright, so I hit about a little over 10,000 RPM. We got near 35 volts. I'm just going to switch my probe over to the yellow wire, and I'll reset my meter here and then retry it. Alright, pretty similar result there, 36. So revving up a little over 10,000 RPM, you should expect roughly 35 volts, it looks like, out of those wires. Now I want to see what happens with my battery voltage. So I'm not going to hook up my meter. Normally you just hook a meter up to your battery. In this case I happen to have a voltage meter here that I have tested, and it seems to be accurate. So you can see my battery's at 12.6, 12.7, something like that. I'm going to start the scooter up and see what it does, if it will actually provide charging voltage here. Well, that's not good. So I had my headlight switch off. That controls my taillight and everything. Didn't have any turn signals, none of that stuff on. And still, my battery voltage was dropping instead of rising. So we would like to see at least a maintaining voltage, maybe above 13 volts. But ideally, I'd like to see something like 14 to maybe 14.5 volts as a charging voltage. And it went nowhere but down. So I'm guessing either there's an issue with my regulator rectifier, or maybe I've got something wired wrong, because I've clearly got voltage coming out of the yellow and white wires as I just tested. I've got about 35 roughly volts coming out of there, and even when revved, my battery voltage didn't go up at all. So something's definitely not right, and it looks like as of now I'm not getting any kind of charging to my battery. I looked around and I found some information about testing bridge rectifiers, or single phase rectifiers like this is, and found some specs for using a diode tester where basically you can see what should happen across different connections depending where your positive and negative probes are. And from that I determined it doesn't look like my my wiring layout here was correct going into my regulator, what I had done here. Now I had followed, this was from a 2008 Yamaha Zuma that I ordered this regulator rectifier, because I had a 2008 Yamaha Zuma service manual, and that gave a pinout of how the regulator rectifier should be set up. So I thought as long as I follow their pinout for the regulator rectifier and order a regulator rectifier for that year of Zuma, I should be good to go. Turns out I got no charging. So what I've done is I've swapped these around based on the results that I got to a little different configuration, and I'll show you what happens now. Now you can see my battery is pretty low at the moment while the engine is off. And there I've got charging. Now the problem is, it looks like it's not very well regulated because I'm seeing over 16 volts when it's revving high. I'm hoping that what happened was when I initially set up my regulator rectifier and some of my wires were in the wrong spots, that perhaps I damaged the regulator portion of this unit. So what I've done is I went ahead and ordered a replacement for this, the exact same part from Yamaha, and I'm going to see what happens when that comes in. For right now, I'm going to rearrange the pins in my connector here to match my newfound configuration, and I'm also going to go ahead and correct the wiring diagram that I initially put up that had a pinout for this. I'm going to change that around to reflect what I found here to actually work with this part number of regulator rectifier. And my apologies, I hate to give anybody bad information. I honestly really thought that I could trust Yamaha and their wiring diagram to provide me with a pinout for their regulator rectifier, but apparently I was wrong. If you really want to be safe before you hook anything up, I guess what you should do in a custom application would be to use the diode testing, like I just had to do anyway. And that's why I put the information on the screen to show you what the diode test kind of involved. So if you really want to be safe, try that. And moving on, I'm going to go ahead and do one more test on this scooter while I'm waiting for my timing light as well as my regulator rectifier. The last thing I'm going to try is a spark strength test. And I've got this little spark strength tester. It's an adjustable tester. And basically you just plug it in to your spark plug wire here. It plugs in basically in place of your spark plug. And then this little screw here will let me adjust the gap, the distance between the two pins here. And the larger the gap that the spark will jump, kind of the better. That means it's a stronger spark. So I'm going to start here. I've got marks. I don't know how well you'll be able to see them, but I've made my own marks as well. So I've got a mark somewhere between the 20 and 30. That's so roughly 25, about halfway through. And then this end will just have to clip onto a ground. Alright, I've turned some lights off, so hopefully it's easier to see the spark if it happens. I've got this set to 25. That should be 25,000 volts according to the tester. And I'm just going to crank the engine over and see if it makes a good spark or not. That looks like a pretty good spark there, consistent spark. So now what I can do is open this up further and then see how long it will continue making a good spark. Now I've got it dialed out to 30 and we'll see what happens there. Nothing. I have 0 sparks. Okay. Now I have it set to 27.5. So I get a very inconsistent spark at 27.5. One of the reasons I wanted to do that spark test was not just for troubleshooting in the future, but I've actually done that exact same test using the same tester on this exact scooter. Now I did have a more stock ignition system, or actually a totally stock ignition system, and I was just checking coils, but I thought it might be interesting to see where this MVT racing ignition system comes out as far as the spark strength, how large of a gap it will jump on my tester compared to that other stuff. So I've got a little cheat sheet here for myself right now, but I'll make up a better graph for you guys to look at. So I got 25 kilovolts, according to my little tester, is the gap that it would jump consistently. I saw a consistent spark at that gap. By 27.5, it was a very inconsistent or an intermittent spark. And by 30, I saw no spark at all. Just for some comparison, you'll see that the stock and the Bando 1E40QMB coils did the exact same number. So literally the stock coil for that scooter with a stock ignition system matched the same numbers as this MVT racing ignition system and racing coil. The Bando was an upgrade coil for it, did the exact same numbers. How much does that matter in the real world? I don't really know, to be honest with you. I know that my MSD, the 8232 coil, which is the one that I just took off of here that I have been using for a couple years, I had no trouble with it, and that was actually the weakest one tested, and I didn't have any problems with it firing the engine over to my knowledge. So mostly I just think it's interesting to see these numbers, to see how it works out. Find it really odd that my Tao, the little slow 4-stroke, its stock ignition coil did better than everything else. It would jump the largest gap at 35 compared to everything else. But again, who knows how much this means in the real world. If nothing else, you can take a look at these numbers. If you find that you're fouling plugs constantly or something like that, and you get numbers significantly lower than what you see on this chart, then maybe that's an issue. Both timing lights came in. The first one, this is the new model. This is an Innova 5568, and basically I got that because it was one of the top rated on Amazon, and I didn't want to pay the kind of money you would pay for something like a Snap-on or whatever. Right out of the box, I can tell you one thing that kind of sucks here is this handle where your hand passes through. For whatever reason, they left sharp edges on there, so that's not really the brightest idea. That's not giving me confidence that this is a quality product. Anyway, the other one I bought is just this old 60s Craftsman timing light, and that doesn't have inductive pickup. It is only the inline style, but I figured hopefully between the two, one of them will work. As you probably noticed, this thing is cutting out around 5,000 RPM. Somewhere around that point, it just stops flashing totally, so you can't measure timing at all. Up until that point, it actually does a pretty good job. I haven't had to fiddle with it very much. I basically just clamped it on, and it started working, and gives me a good light to see what I'm doing. But I think what the issue is, when I bought this, the description said that it measured to 9,900 RPM. But it probably doesn't take into account a multiple spark system like this. So it's got a 2-stroke and a 4-stroke setting here. So it would probably be 1 pulse every other revolution and then 1 pulse per revolution, but this was doing 2 pulses per revolution. So I think with double the pulses, it kind of loses its steam at about half the speed that it normally would, so it's cutting out around 5,000 RPM instead of closer to 10,000. I just tried the old Craftsman, and that does absolutely nothing at all. It won't even flash once. So now I've got 3 timing lights sitting here, and I can't get much above base timing, essentially, for checking it. I can get up to maybe 5,000 RPM or so. So what do you do when you got 3 timing lights that don't work for you? Well, naturally, you buy a 4th. So this is the Centec Harbor Freight brand. There's the box for it. It's their timing light. The reason I bought this one is because I told the guys on the forum about my woes with the timing lights here, and 3 people responded about timing lights that have worked pretty well for them. That was 190 Mech, Pito Bread, and Ryan Ott. And all 3 of those guys are using basically the cheapest timing lights that they can get their hands on. So this one is from Harbor Freight for about $28 is what I paid for it. And the other guys are buying them off eBay or AliExpress for $20, $25, something like that. I didn't have to wait for this one. I could just go pick it up today, so that's why I went with this. But basically they're having the best luck with just the cheapest timing lights they can get. And this one does have a dial on the back that is for advance, but I don't want to use that, and it wouldn't work here because this should be probably locked in at either 1 pulse, most likely 1 pulse every other revolution. The only weird thing is the dial actually has 0 to 60 degrees, and then it kind of continues past on either direction. So it's kind of strange looking at the 0. If I actually want no bias here, just to read the timing straight up, should I have it set on 0 or way down here or what? That's kind of weird. Other thing about this is it actually feels like a toy. It is super cheap feeling, super lightweight. The clip here, really cheap feeling, but I don't really care if it'll work. It doesn't bother me that much. For the price of this, I could replace it multiple times before I ever got to the price of something like the Innova over here. So if it works, I don't care how cheap it is, but just a heads up in case anybody else tries to pick one of these up, you're not going to get what feels like a quality tool. Well, the cheap timing light does work, but again, it has its share of issues. I was really hoping this might do the trick. But just like the Innova, it cuts out somewhere around 5,000 to maybe 6,000 RPM and just totally stops working. And just the way it flashes makes it harder to see the timing indicator on the engine. But I can see it most of the time. For some reason, it disappears totally right around the 4,000 RPM mark, and I just can't see the indicator at all. And then it comes back and then cuts out. I mentioned this knob on the back, and you can see that it can be at 0 or kind of below 0 here. And I checked that, and it looks like it's closest to my other light when it is all the way down. Although it doesn't really make a whole lot of difference between that 0 and all the way out. Also, this thing has 0 to 60 degrees of advance on the timing light that you can dial in. And with this engine, I messed with it a little bit, and if I dial it all the way over to the 60 or beyond, it changes roughly 15 degrees on my actual timing reading when I'm looking at my timing indicator. So basically, because this thing is looking for 1 pulse every other revolution, or you could say a half a pulse a revolution, then the scooter is putting out 2 pulses per revolution. Basically, the scooter is doing 4 times what this thing expects. So that's why 60 degrees turns into 15 degrees on here. And if you had a 2-stroke mode on something like the Innova light, it should then be cut in half. I really wanted to provide everyone with a timing graph of this thing so we could clearly see what kind of curve this ignition system has. But as you can see, I'm 4 lights into this thing and I still can't get there. What I can tell you right now, and this is from reviewing video of both lights, I looked at the video just because, as I've told you in some of the other videos, I put the camera straight onto it, or as straight on as I can, and then I figure that way I don't get any difference from my point of view. I figure it's probably about as accurate as I can get. So depending which timing light I look at, they both bounce around a lot at 2000 RPM. The Innova looks like 30 to 35 degrees, and the Centec is bouncing around so much it looks like somewhere between 30 and 40 degrees. So I'm not exactly sure where it is there. I'd say 30 to 35 degrees probably, because the Innova is not bouncing so much, and that's where it is. By 3000 RPM, then it bumps up to 40 degrees of advance on both lights. By 4000 RPM, it goes up to 42 degrees. And at 5000 RPM, it still looks like it's right around 42 degrees. All I can do is guess at this point. I'm assuming perhaps what they've done is it has less ignition advance at very low RPM, like cranking and idle speed, because maybe they're trying to make the engine easier to start. A lot of advance will make the engine hard to start, and there's also a risk that you could start the engine and it runs backwards. So you would actually get on your scooter if you didn't notice. When you hit the gas, you'd take off in reverse instead of going forward. So lessening the advance there at cranking RPM would lessen the risk of that. I'm assuming that's what's happening. It could just be an issue with my timing light. And then it bumps itself up to 40, 42 degrees. I guess it should be retarding as it gets higher in the RPM, closer to the power band. It should start retarding, but I can't see that right now, so it would be nothing more than a guess. What I plan on doing is moving on here and just getting the thing back together for right now. I may end up ordering one of the eBay timing lights or AliExpress timing light or something like that, the cheap ones that the other guys recommended. I don't know. I could end up building a tester of some sort. I really don't know, but right now I don't want to get into that. I'd like to try and get this thing on the road. The new Regulator rectifier came in, exact same part number from Yamaha. Got that installed. If you recall earlier, instead of stopping at say 14 to 14.5 volts charging, when I revved it up it would go over 16 volts. So let's see if that fixed it. It doesn't look like that changed anything. My voltage is still going over 16 when I rev it up. But if you notice at the end of the video, that last clip, I was turning my headlight on, and when I turn my headlight on, that kind of self-regulates. It looks like that probably draws enough power that maybe I won't have to worry about it too much. I would really prefer that it was just regulated no matter what the case was, that the regulator took care of it, but that may just be what I've got to deal with right now. So I got it all back together. It's down on the ground. I know in the last video I had said hopefully I'll be able to show you the scooter running and whatnot in the next video. Well, it does at least run. I don't think I'm going to take it out right now. That'll probably be the next video, because if you can see behind me, the weather's pretty nasty today. It's raining, foggy, cold, etc. So I think I'm just going to wait on that, and the video is probably getting long enough by this point anyway. I think what I am going to do though, because I'm pretty curious myself, is just to kind of mess with it in the garage bay here a little bit and just see if it feels totally different when I get on the throttle or not. It definitely feels more immediate, because as soon as I hit the throttle it just starts spinning the rear tire. And yeah, I do understand I'm on a smooth concrete garage floor, so that's not a big accomplishment here. But I think just based on other things I've messed around with in here, that does feel a little better than what it was before. Whether that will translate into any kind of quicker acceleration, or if the timing will allow me to get more top speed, those things I can't tell you yet, but I will definitely be trying to do some comparisons in the next video. I just need the weather to give me a little bit of a break. Anyway, for right now, thanks for watching. If you enjoyed the video, found it helpful, please give me a like, share, and subscribe for more. And don't forget to ring the bell for notifications so you can see all of my updates. Thanks.